RCP if you haven't met me before. And with me is our newest staff member, Taylor Owens, and she is supporting the work we're doing here today by making sure that you're muted if your dog starts barking, and checks the chat if you have any questions and things like that. And I am leaving tomorrow. I'm headed to Hawaii and we'll be gone a couple weeks. And so she's also going to be doing all of the follow-up stuff for the training. I know you guys are jealous, right? I'm jealous of me too right now. Excited to go. And so she's going to be doing a lot of the follow-up, although I will be kind of checking email and stuff like that after I've had enough sun and snorkel and fish and stuff like that. I will be checking to make sure things are going okay. But I want to go ahead and make sure we've got CLE and CEU for this today. The CLE form is going to be emailed to you through STAR Chapter. Taylor's going to do that. So if you have trouble logging in with STAR Chapter or anything, you might want to see if you can't get your access worked out so that you can complete the CLE form. Evaluation is going to be also sent to you through the STAR Chapter website. We are going to have certificates that will be emailed out to you after everyone's had the opportunity to complete the evaluation. So usually about 2 weeks after the lunch and learn, we send out certificates. The certificates are mainly for anybody that wants a certificate of attendance or for record of your CEU. If you are a licensed clinician of some sort and trying to get your hours for that. The CLE form is for the attorneys. So if you get a CLE form to complete, that's not your form to complete unless you are an attorney and are getting your CLE. This is a general CLE, by the way. The next lunch and learn, just FYI, is going to be provided by the National Drug Court Institute by a wonderful presenter named Dr. Carlos Quesada Gomez, who I have had the privilege of training with in the past. And so I'm really excited. He is going to come do the, let's see here, it's June 30th, I believe. Actually, let me pull up my screen so you guys can see real quick the next few. June 30th, equity and inclusion, and he's going to do that one for us. And I think registration is now up for that one, and we will also apply for CLE, and we do have approval for CEU already in place for that. So if you have the opportunity, come here, Dr. Carlos Quesada Gomez. He does equity and inclusion for the National Drug Court Institute all over the country, and he's just a wonderful person to get to know. I think that is all of my list of stuff, which means I want to pull up my presentation and get started because we have a lot to cover today. This is one of the PowerPoints, I would say, that is the one that people like to see the most. Can you guys see the PowerPoint? Okay. That everybody loves to see the most. I want to, something's happened here, hold on. So am I sharing my notes screen with you now, or can you see the PowerPoint itself? You're gonna have to talk because I can't see you. Can you guys see the PowerPoint? Not
Marie, it looks like it's your note slide also.
Okay, hold on. That's what I'm trying to pull up is my screen and notes together so you guys can see the PowerPoint. Are you still seeing my notes?
I just see the PowerPoint.
Okay. All right, well, I mean, it doesn't matter if you see my notes. It's just if you see the PowerPoint, you can see it better. So anyway, incentive sanctions and therapeutic adjustments is one of the sessions that people, it's one of the foundational things. And Taylor and I were talking before this session, and incentive sanctions and therapeutic adjustments, that third piece is really something that has been added just since the best practice standards came out in 2013 and then 2015 respectively. And it is It's based on the research and evaluation information that we have over 30 years of now that basically says, in a nutshell, we need to be incentivizing high-risk, high-need participants more than we were before. We need all of the responses to behavior to be, clear, immediate, and attached to the behavior so that there is no question about why the court is responding the way that it's responding. And if you're going to adjust treatment in any way because you are responding to a need to increase or decrease treatment or to revise treatment services and case planning, that needs to be done completely separately from responding to behaviors so that there isn't any idea of punitive consequences because somebody needs treatment. If somebody needs more treatment, yes, they may need a sanction for lying. No, they do not need a sanction because they need more treatment. They need more treatment. And so our research and our information that we have, come to understand over the last decades has really helped to hone in on what exactly those responses need to be. And so this presentation has evolved over the last many years. And of course, it's not hold on, it's not moving. What is it about when you start recording that, your computer just stops doing what it's supposed to do, right? It happens to me a lot these days. All right, can you guys see the PowerPoint? No, wait, hold on. Can you guys see the PowerPoint? Excellent. Holler at me if you can't see it because it looks to me like you can see it now. So the incentive sanctions and therapeutic adjustments are really based on, behavioral modification information that we have had through the field of psychology for many decades. And so, you're familiar with some of the more traditional operant conditioning stuff if you've gone through Psychology 101. Where, Pavlov's dog and things like that, basically that notion that, our behaviors can be modified through things that we recognize in our lives as information coming in that we then respond to, and it creates sort of this pattern in our lives. And while our behavior modification and recovery court is really not based on the operant conditioning idea, we are still looking at ways to modify behavior so that it's really clear to our participants, what it is that we're expecting of them. And so what we're doing in recovery court is we are giving them information that we are trying to change their behavior. And so we're going to get into examples of how your recovery court does or can do that so that you can change behavior, either behavior that you want to see continue or add behavior that you want to see happen, or to reduce behavior that you want to see go away. And if you've done any parenting classes, some of this is going to sound really familiar. And I want to be clear, this really is designed to be effective with the high risk, high need participants. So if you are also providing services to folks that are in, say, a high need but low risk situation, you might have to tweak this some. They may not need to be incentivized as much. For example, they might have some, intrinsic motivation already there to, do whatever it is that you're asking them to do without high rewards. So this is really for high risk, high need folks. And I'm going to hopefully say that a couple of times. Here we have some resources, and I'll give you some more resources on down the line. one other thing NDCI did, which by the way, this is their PowerPoint. I got written permission to use their PowerPoint. So this is their information, the presentation that I've done for them nationally and that I've seen other folks do for them nationally in their operational tune-up, by the way. But this is how they have started to approach sort of how to help program. Some of the feedback that I have received from folks and that they've received is it can be really challenging to figure out, when you're looking at incentives and sanctions and therapeutic assessments, how to be creative, how to, start doing things or providing incentives and sanctions that aren't just the same all the time. And, we get into a rut and we basically do the same thing. Those kinds of comments. And so they have structured their newest presentation in a way that begins to maybe not give you a laundry list of creative things to do, although I do have that too, but to begin thinking about, that there are so many avenues that you can take. You can positively or negatively reinforce something through, by incentivizing. You can take away or give something in the sanctioning process, take away or give something in the therapeutic adjustment and in supervision adjustment is their newest component to think about. So there are a number of different ways that you can really think about responding to behavior when you are working with the Recovery Court participants. And so I invite you to consider these multitude of avenues when we are talking about the different ways to respond to behavior. Their previous material really got into explaining the positive reinforcement and the negative reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is just, giving something to incentivize, and negative reinforcement is not a negative thing. It just means take away something to incentivize, okay? An example would be, giving things that we take for granted. I would say sometimes we have a tendency to forget that something as simple as verbal praise from the judge or from a team member in court is a positive reinforcement and is an incentive. And I'm not suggesting that, that means that's all you need to do or anything, but I do think it's important to recognize that you can be really creative with just verbal praise. You can, for example, the judge can verbally praise from the bench, but then if you really want to kind of layer the verbal praise, then somebody else on the team or somebody else is on the team, multiple people, could also verbally praise the participant. And so you've taken that incentive that's pretty common of, the judge saying, you're doing a great job. This is terrific. I want you to keep doing this. And you can increase the verbal praise, by also saying, listen to what so-and-so over here had to say. I want them to share what they said about you today. And that person can get up and say, I was just saying, I noticed that, X, Y, and Z. And so you can use verbal praise strategically to enhance that incentive. You can do that with all of these incentives, if you think about it, that are listed on this PowerPoint alone. Applause, the traditional applause is, somebody talks about how many days clean they have, and everybody, claps and oftentimes stands up, right? Or somebody is phasing up, and oftentimes, there's clapping and there's standing up. You can consider ways to even, change up or level up the applause by either not applauding so much, on the front end. And so therefore, when you do add things to applaud for, it's noticed, or you can strategically use the standing up. If your team, for example, stands up for one thing, but doesn't stand up for another, there are just ways that you can strategically consider incentivizing, using the incentives that are probably your go-to incentives. And then there are other things that you can add, like certificates, bookmarks, books, T-shirts. You know, you could have a fun T-shirt that if somebody gets a certain, you know, you could have a fun award, even not something that's going to be hurtful, but something that could be even humorous, right? And you can have a fun award and have a T-shirt that goes with it. And there are all sorts of things that you can do, and we do have some handouts for creative incentives that NDCI provides if you want to take a look at those. It's important, I'll just mention, Judge Bull actually had it in her presentation, so I won't go over it in a lot of detail, but it is important to make an effort to incentivize more than you sanction. So if you can do like a 4-to-1, that would be maybe not ideal, but that would be good. That would be a really good start if you were able to do 4-to-1. And it would be really interesting if there are any programs on here that are tracking that to see if you notice a difference, because your high risk, high need participants truly, you know, they have not told themselves good things about themselves, and they haven't had other people tell them good things about themselves. You know, they think that they are very broken when they are coming into recovery court. And so the notion that they can do a lot of good things and that there are good things to say about them is really pretty foreign, or maybe not foreign, but they're far removed from what it feels like, because they haven't had themselves or other people saying these things to them. And so you cannot overestimate the value of incentivizing your high risk, high need participant. That doesn't mean, though, that we have to, or that we should let behavior that's inappropriate slide. And so rule breaking, any sanctionable behavior, it must be addressed in the same way that you're going to address sanctionable, okay, maybe I should stop saying that word since I can't say it. Any rule breaking or inappropriate behavior in your house needs to be addressed. It has to be addressed for your high risk, high need participants too, so that they are very clear about you know, where the boundaries are. And this also is about behavior modification. What behaviors are we trying to extinguish, and what behaviors are we trying to add or increase, right? And so punishing behavior looks similar to the stuff that you guys are going to be familiar with. And you can also be a little bit more creative with your sanctions, especially if there are ways to increase or to include sanctions that are going to be, say, meaningful or valuable to the participant themselves. And we can talk about that a little bit more here in a minute, but you definitely have to sanction the behavior when it is appropriate, when it is inappropriate, and needs to be addressed. And those all need to be separate. They don't have to be separate in the sense that you can't adjust treatment and also sanction at the same time. You can do that. You have a participant who's come in and they have lied and lied and lied about using, and they have a drug screen that indicates they have in fact used, but they also need a more intensive treatment. There is an assessment done and it is clinically indicated that their treatment level needs to increase. They have some sanctionable behavior that's happening in the form of lying, because that's something that we expect them to start working on from phase 1, correct? But they also have a treatment need. And it is valuable and necessary to be clear about that to them in court, right? When you address these things with them, you can say, you know, we said to you on the front end that when you moved into phase 1, when you started the program, we want you to show up and we want you to tell the truth. Telling the truth is one of the first things that, although we know that it might not be the easiest thing to do, that we expect you to begin working on. So now you're in phase 2 and you are not telling the truth about this particular thing. the lying, the dishonesty has to be sanctioned. You're going to have a sanction for that. And because you're in phase 2, that's what the sanction looks like. However, we also understand that that you having a positive drug screen and therefore continuing to use indicates that you've got a need there, and we want to help you with that. And so we're going to do a clinical assessment and see what it is that we need to adjust in terms of your treatment so that we can help you, be successful here. And that is a therapeutic issue. That is not a sanction. That's a therapeutic issue for you. And that's something that will be discussed with your clinician. And so, you can be clear to the participants that those are, while you might be discussing them in the same setting, they are two different things. I'll stop here for a minute and see if anybody has any questions in the chat. Okay. I'm going to take that as a no. You can also, of course, when you are considering, when the team is sitting there and trying to decide what to do with a person, and perhaps they're in a situation where, you're not sure if they need a sanction at this point, or maybe they need a small sanction, but something else needs to happen. You can also consider, of course, what kind of supervision adjustments may need to be done. It is best practice to have a case plan. It is best practice to have a case plan that consists of the court requirements and court expectations, and then also clinical. And some programs, those kind of are together, and some programs, those happen sort of separately, but they should be integrated to the best of your ability in the program. And so you can look at supervision adjustments, not necessarily clinical adjustments, but supervision adjustments, and see, do we need to look at frequency of drug testing? Do we need to, have some sort of ankle monitor situation for a bit? Do we need to change curfew, or have they had too much freedom and we need to restrict their travel or their movement some until we get sort of a handle on this? All of these things can be considered outside of, but in conjunction with looking at incentive sanctions and therapeutic adjustments as well. Because of time, I am not going to spend a lot of time on this case management and supervision. We do have a census and caseload presentation. I can't remember what month that is. And so we'll be spending a little bit more time there, and also in the other treatment resources standard. When we do that one, we'll be talking a little bit more about case management there too. And supervision. And we also have Matt Jenkins, who was at the conference, and he's going to be doing a webinar kind of expanding on his presentation at the conference. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I know how many slides we have left to go through. I'm going to get to here. So in terms of incentive sanctions and therapeutic adjustments, best practice tells us that we need those to be certain. Like if you're going to do this behavior, the court is going to respond. The more wishy-washy you are, or the more they observe that sometimes you respond and sometimes you don't, the least the more ineffective your sanctions and incentives and therapeutic adjustments programming, if you will, is going to be ineffective. Reliable detection. You have to ensure that and can tell when something's happening. And the standard example is, don't have a curfew if you aren't able to enforce it, right? An unenforceable curfew is just a rule waiting to be broken. And so don't have it if you can't enforce it. So you have to make sure that all of your rules and all of the things that can be incentivized and sanctioned are things that you can reliably determine in fact have happened or have not happened, depending on the behavior that you're considering. Incentives and sanctions and therapeutic adjustments also need to be associated with the behavior. So, association with the behavior to me ties with this idea of immediacy, which is the next thing. If you are able to respond to the behavior as quickly as possible, then it's going to be easier to associate your response as a court, et cetera, to the behavior. If you also consider ways that the incentive or sanction is associated with the behavior in what the sanction or incentive might be, that's also another way to associate the behavior. And a really easy example would be, something where they are asked to write something that is specifically related to the behavior that they exhibited, right? That writing request can be something that is very specifically about whatever that behavior was. And so that's an easy example that I can give you off the top of my head. And then, of course, immediacy. As soon as the behavior is exhibited, what we know from best practices and what we know from the research and evaluation is that the quicker you can respond to the behavior after it happens, the more powerful your response as a court is. So, if you are a program that doesn't meet but every 2 weeks, you're going to have a hard time with this immediacy component if you only respond when you have court every 2 weeks. I would encourage you, if that is your case, that you find ways to respond in between times. And sometimes that means, bringing someone in on a day that isn't recovery court day, whatever that looks like. Just something to think about, because that immediacy of response to their behavior is pretty powerful. So in the final kind of piece, I want to go over all of those components that are basically in the best practice standards. Guys, if you haven't read the best practice standards, I encourage you to do that, because basically the next several slides are covering the best practice standards and the components of this particular standard of incentive, sanctions, and therapeutic adjustments. And one of those is advance notice, providing the participant and the members of your team written policies and procedures, having handbooks that are up to date and current, so that the participants know from the very beginning, and your team members know from the very beginning, what the program is going to respond, what types of responses the program is going to have, and what behaviors the program is going to respond to. And that includes the range. You don't want to say, if you do this, then automatically you're doing that necessarily. But you do want to give them an idea of the kinds of things that you're looking at. And you want to let them know that you're considering who they are and where they are in the program, because you're not going to respond to somebody in phase 1 that has a positive drug screen in the first 3 weeks, the same way that you're going to respond to a person who is in phase 3, has gone through a bulk of treatment services, and you find out that they have been using for the past 3 weeks, and you didn't know until they got a positive drug screen. That's a different situation. It's a different person, and they're in a different place in the program. So positive drug screen, it's the same exact behavior, from your perspective, but all the detail matters. The devil's in the details, right? So it's important that they also understand that they're going to be responded to based on their individual circumstances. So you can I give them ideas. They certainly need to know what kinds of things you're going to do to respond to their behavior, but you need to leave it open so that the team can determine based on, and the judge can determine based on the circumstance. And then opportunity to be heard. If you don't already have an opportunity, especially when you're sanctioning somebody, to give them, the floor and let them explain or whatever. This is definitely something that in research and evaluation has been noted as something valuable. Participants often, even if it does not change the circumstance or the response of the court, there is value in them knowing that you at least gave them a chance to tell their story. And maybe their story is not in denial of any of their behavior, but maybe their story, they've thought through their behavior and why they may have done their behavior, and they want to share that with you. And there's a lot of value in them being able to do that. So an opportunity to be heard is another one of those components, as well as equivalent consequences, which I just talked about just a minute ago, where you need to be able to give them a range of what's going to happen to them, recognizing that, where they are in the program is going to change, and that equivalency does not necessarily mean the same, right? Because where they are and in what level and who they are gonna change exactly what you choose to do from a consequence standpoint. I see stuff in the chat, so I'm going to stop right here and just see if there are any questions that I need to address at this point. You'll have to say something to me if there is.
It was actually me trying to get everyone to enter in their attendance. So
excellent. Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure. I can see that there are things happening in chat, but I can't see it. And I'm afraid to push any buttons to take my screen off. Another one is professional demeanor. One of the things that we've learned in our information from evaluation and research is that judges who are really punitive and overly stern and hot-headed, or express a lot of anger to the participants, say punitive types of things to the participants, is actually not very helpful. Sanctions particularly should be delivered with a calm demeanor. The participant should not be shamed. If somebody's having a hard time, actually, because we know our high-risk, high-need participants are going to exhibit poor behavior, if you are able to respond to them, with the recognition that they're just going to have poor behavior, I think it does help. It does help when you're responding to them, because you really are trying to help change their behavior. And shaming them or demeaning them because of the behavior is not necessarily going to help them change the behavior. Asking them questions that stimulate thought about their behavior may help them change the behavior. Expressing disappointment, is not inappropriate, but yelling, demeanor should always remain professional. And that's not to pick on the judges at all either. That is really from the team. When they see that their behavior is inappropriate, but that you're not freaking out about it, it helps them to maybe next time come to you and talk about behavior before it happens, because they know that they're not going to be shamed about it. They actually have some support from the program, and they can talk about, okay, I'm wanting to do this again, or this is what's happening now, and these are the thoughts coming in my head. And that is a learning opportunity for them. Whereas the other is just, I'm not going to say anything if I don't have to, because I don't, otherwise this is the way I'm going to be treated. And I'm used to being treated that way. I've treated myself that way, and other people have treated me that way. So I don't really want to go there anymore. Progressive sanctions, you need to consider the goals, their proximal and distal goals. If you have participated in any of the previous sessions from the National Drug Court Institute, some of the trainings spend a lot of time talking about proximal and distal goals, proximal being goals that are easier to obtain. And notice I say easier, not necessarily easy. And then distal goals, those goals that are a little bit more difficult and need to kind of be out there as things that we're going to work towards, but may not be able to do right away. And so if you think about where your participants are in the program. Where are they working on proximal or distal? What are the proximal and distal goals that they're working on based on who they are and where they are in the program? Then your sanctioning also needs to be based on where they sit in that process, and their sanctions may need to be of a higher magnitude depending on whether you're responding to something that's attached to a proximal goal or a distal goal. And I'll go back to the positive drug screen thing. If they're in phase 1 and they have a positive drug screen, is that a proximal goal or a distal goal for them to stop using? I know what you're saying right now. If you have heard these presentations, you know that that's really a distal goal. That's something that we're focusing on down the road. We really want you to show up and start being honest, right? Come to treatment. All of those things are really their more proximal goals. And that distal goal is the, abstinence, component of the program. It's a little further down, harder to do, et cetera. So you're not going to give them a significant, a high magnitude sanction for something that is a distal goal at that point, right? However, if they're in phase 1 and they keep being dishonest, right? Being honest is something that you expect them to be working on in phase 1, and that is a proximal goal. And so your sanction magnitude, the severity, et cetera, may be higher because you want them to know that you take the fact that they're continuing to lie seriously. We could actually spend an entire hour or more on the magnitude levels, et cetera, of sanctioning. There's so much content here that I don't have time to cover in an hour. Jail sanctions should be used judiciously and sparingly, no more than a few days at a time. You actually hit sort of a threshold where it's just not even effective anymore if you're going to stick them in jail for longer than 5 days. ACI recommends the 24 to 72 hour time frame. Your cost effectiveness of your program starts going down the more you sanction people using jail. You can get into some other issues, but certainly, they have a right to the due process, talking to an attorney, having a hearing, et cetera. If you're going to put them in jail. I know a lot of your participants may waive those rights, but they certainly should be given the option if you are going to take away their liberties to that extent. But research tells us that not that jail can't be effective, but jail is certainly not going to be effective if you put them in there for long periods of time. And you can really use the opportunity if they have short-term flash incarceration. It's one of the words I've heard used. A flash incarceration, can give somebody perspective. And also if they are working or going to school or have reconnected with family and you're considering putting them in jail for a long period of time also kind of starts dismantling some of that effort, and that can feel pretty deflating, and it can backfire on you. Things to consider. Okay, here we are. I want to see where I am in the, okay. So this again, we could stay in this whole, we've got the proximal distal thing here. We can stay in this area and talk about this for a long period of time. But basically, this is the notion, and I feel like teams sort of have to figure this out, trial and error a little bit. But if you start thinking about the different ways that you can incentivize sanction, what therapeutic adjustments and supervision adjustments need to be made, need to be considered. And then you think about, what phase is this person in? What do we know about them? What they've responded to in the past? What has, have they responded to something that they responded to really well? Do we know that there is a no-go zone for them if they, have significant trauma issues, for example? That might be something that you consider when you're considering sanctioning. And where are they with their proximal and distal goals right now? If they're in phase 3 and they're about to move into phase 4, then, what are their proximal and distal goals? All of these things help you to consider, okay, if we're responding to a certain behavior, where is the effective zone for them? And especially if they've been in your program for a little while, that effective zone is going to be partly based on what you have done with them in the past, right? Because if you have had to sanction them in the past, and they have not responded well, or they're continuing to do the same behavior over and over again, or if they have never gotten in trouble and now they're in phase 3 about to move into phase 4 and something happens and you're like, what? We didn't expect this from Bob. All of those need to be taken into consideration about what's going to be the sweet spot for Bob, right? We don't want to be so blasé about it that Bob and everybody else that's watching Bob get sanctions like, oh, dude, this is nothing. We could do this and perhaps only get this kind of sanction. But at the same time, we don't want to like throw the baby out with the bathwater. I kind of hate that saying, but I need to figure out actually another way to say that. But you know what I'm saying? We don't want to overly respond in a way that, Bob throws his hands up and it's like, what am I even doing here anymore? Because I can't even with this. I'm done. And he begins to sabotage himself because it feels impossible. The sanction is just so tough. So finding that sweet spot is really something I think you have to navigate, and it's not something necessarily somebody can just tell you how to get to without saying all of these things I just said. Your team can discuss all of these different things about this person, where they are, who they are, what level they're in, how long they've been in the program, what have their sanctions been in the past, what's something that has been effective with them. All of those things can create can provide information for the team to discuss what's going to be the sweet spot for Bob, and then look at your range of sanctions that are, that you already have for that, phase or for that infraction, and what's going to work for Bob, and, or is this going to work for Bob? And always, always, always explain to Bob and everybody else listening, why that was chosen. There's a lot of power in explaining that to them so that they understand the sanction that they are being given. So proximal distal, I forgot this actually was in this presentation, right? We want them to show up. We want them to be honest. We want them to, come to treatment and try. Distal goals are, improving your attitude about this, being able to do everything that we ask you to do without exception and complaint, and staying clean and sober, right? And so when you're looking at those magnitudes, you're also looking at, if it's proximal, it's proximal goal that there's an infraction for, then the sanction, the magnitude of the sanction is going to be a little higher. But if it's a distal goal that we are considering an infraction for, then the response is going to be a little lower, right? And so it changes depending on, what those things are. And I love this. If you guys don't already use something like this, NDCI in the past has had a template or a handout when I've done trainings with them that we gave to the teams we were training. But this is you can have this PowerPoint and you can pull this and laminate it or stick it up on your wall. And I think if you're really struggling, or if you're beginning to practice, how you're responding to behaviors, this is a great tool because it kind of spells it out. Who are they? Are they high risk, high need? If your recovery court is taking people who are not high risk, high need, because you have multiple tracks or something like that, then, that needs to be considered. Where are they in the program? Where are they? What exactly happened? How much information do we have? When you get into court and they have the opportunity to be heard, does that change perhaps the response? The judge has the ultimate say in the long run. And while judges are always encouraged to take their team's, suggestions seriously, in the long run, when the judge gets in court and that person has the opportunity to be heard, the judge has full authority to change the response. Maybe you can go back go back to the back, take a break and have another conversation about it, because perhaps there's more information to give the judge before he or she makes a decision to change something. But there certainly is that opportunity. So gathering that information is important. Which ones are you responding to? You need to let the person, the participant, and everybody listening know exactly what behaviors you're responding to, and talk that through with them so everybody's very clear what is happening. Give them what exactly it is that is happening, and how it's going to happen needs to be discussed. This is one of the more powerful, I would say, changes in the way that teams are being trained, is to, in staffing, talk about how the response to behaviors is going to be delivered, especially if it's a big one, especially if you're responding to something that's more significant. How is this going to be explained to everybody? What is the best way to do this so that you're not breaking any confidence, that you're not sharing anything in court that doesn't need to be shared, because everybody doesn't need to hear everything. You might have information about them that just doesn't need to be explained in court, right? And so how does it get delivered? What information gets talked about? What is the response? Why is it happening that way? All of these things, can be considered and can be pretty powerful when you use it as a learning opportunity for Bob, and when you use it as a learning opportunity for everybody listening to Bob's sanction, right? That's all really powerful stuff. This is a great slide right here. Other things that are actually in this particular sanction sentence and therapeutic adjustments is that you really need to sanction unauthorized, non-medically indicated use of intoxicating addictive substances. Even if they're legal, you need to have a policy in place, and everybody needs to understand that when it comes to medications that are going to interfere with your ability to move through treatment satisfactorily, then you're not supposed to be using it. And the program needs to have an effective way of monitoring that through drug screening and rules around what needs to be disclosed, etc. And partnerships with physicians, all of those things. I'm not talking about evidence-based treatment modalities where somebody might need medication, although I am talking about the use of medications that might be prescribed medications that are being used, not in accordance with their prescribing, with the prescription. But certainly these things need to be sanctioned so that everybody's clear what the rules are around use. This is becoming particularly interesting in states where there's more legalization. So we might get into that a little bit more in Tennessee too, depending on what our General Assembly does over the next few years. Therapeutic adjustments, okay? Therapeutic adjustments are the lane of your clinicians. Therapeutic adjustments are not the lane of the court. If somebody has some issues around their level of treatment needs to be adjusted, they need a clinical assessment, they need a referral for mental health, whatever that is the clinician's responsibility to ensure that the proper assessments and information is gathered and to make a recommendation. It is not appropriate for court people to determine level of treatment. So So your clinician is the one that should be saying what a person's level of treatment is. The team doesn't necessarily sit around and say, this person really needs to go to inpatient. Well, that may or may not be true. The clinicians really need to do an assessment and give you the recommendation for what level of treatment needs to happen. So just be aware that therapeutic adjustments are in the clinician's lane, not in the court professional's lane. Hopefully nobody is giving augmented sentences if people aren't really able to complete treatment. The second bullet here, do not give augmented sentences or punish participants who have not had adequate treatment. This is particularly an issue in rural areas where perhaps the continuum of care, all of the opportunities do not exist. And so, and or a court that just puts everybody in the same group instead of doing a clinical assessment to determine level of care. If that's you, or if a program does that and somebody's not successful because they were put into a group that wasn't necessarily what was determined by a clinical assessment, it's really not their fault if they are not successful, because they were really not put into the right treatment level to begin with. It's just a recognition that if you are one of those programs that doesn't have all the services available, and so you are putting people in treatment, that's not clinically indicated, or you're putting people into just the same group, no matter what happens, they come into this group. And this goes for if you put them in a higher level than they need or a lower level than they need. If you put people in a higher level than they need, especially young people, you can do damage to them. So if you're doing that and they don't successfully complete your program, they should certainly not be punished because you put them in treatment for whatever reason. You put them in a treatment level that was not appropriate. People need to be doing stuff, because when you take away their people, you take away the places that they're hanging out with and the things that they're doing, what the heck are they going to do? They may sit at home and do absolutely nothing for a little while, but at some point, that is not going to work. And so so one of the things we know is that you need to incentivize productivity, things that they can do that are healthy for themselves, mind, body, spirit, etc. Things that are going to support their recovery, things that are going to support their passion and their vision and mission for themselves. All need to be supported in the case plan and in open court. They need to be incentivized for doing those things. This seems so simple, but it can't be stated enough that if you want people to actually begin doing other things, incentivizing them to do other things is going to help them do other things. It's a circle, but it is true. So your program can really spend a lot of time and energy having conversations in court with your folks about what they're doing that is different than what they were doing before, and that is non-using behavior. And you can include that in case plans when you're talking with them from a supervision or clinical perspective. That needs to be integrated anyway, so that you are helping them identify things that are productive for themselves that they can also accomplish, right? And that they can look and say, oh, I did that. And you can help them do that. Because if they haven't really figured out how to do that for themselves yet, they may, want to set some expectations that aren't realistic for the time that you have them. And you want to help them be successful during the time that you have them, right? Okay, we talked about this. Already, so I'm going to move this. Phase progression or promotion. Obviously, you want to incentivize this, and obviously there are expectations that need to be identified very specifically and need to be written around phase promotion. it seems kind of obvious if you're a recovery court and you've done the training that you need to have written and very defined objectives in order to advance from one phase to the next. I can't tell you how many programs I've worked with, not in the state of Tennessee, that don't really have that at all. You know, they just probably just started and it wasn't really something they considered as valuable. But your high risk, high need participants, they need these kind of short-term, you know, objectives. They need that structure. They need to know what it is that they are working towards when they are coming to see you every week or every other week for so long. They need to know what boxes they are checking off so that they can move to the next thing. And so do you, really, right? So that you can also integrate any of your behavior responses into phase promotion. Participants, in a nutshell, I won't read this slide, but in a nutshell, as long as people are trying, as long as you know that people are trying, not the participants that are just flagrantly ignoring all your rules and constantly being sanctioned because they are not willing to follow the rules, even though they signed your agreement. Folks that are actively trying to and just having a really hard time, as long as they are continuing to try, it is suggested that you do not terminate them, or that termination is just a last result. And I know every single one of you that have been doing recovery court for more than 2 years can name people in those circumstances, right? And so participants who are terminated unfavorably receive a sentence for disposition for the underlying offense. Participant and program outcomes are poor if minimal consequences are imposed for withdrawing. So you definitely want to make sure that if people are going to say goodbye, I don't want to be around anymore, that it isn't something that's super easy to do, because that's what's going to happen. You can take a guess. Participants are informed in advance of the circumstances that may lead to them receiving an augmented sentence, if that's going to actually happen for failing to complete it. That's something that gets discussed well in advance so that they're not blindsided. And graduates avoid criminal record, avoid incarceration, or receive reduced sentence or disposition as an incentive for completion. Your participants need a legal incentive to start your program. Just being motivated to change their lives is not enough incentive. The actual standard, this is the actual standard. Consequences for all participants' behaviors are predictable, fair, consistent, and administered following evidence-based principles of effective behavior modification. That is a ton of stuff. That's a ton of stuff. These, I love the hour, but man, it goes by so fast. So we have 2 minutes for questions. I have 3 while you consider if you want to unmute or type in a question. We have 3, what am I trying to say? We have 3 handouts. One of them is a handout of incentives and sanctions ideas. And the other 2, if you attended the last lunch and learn we did with Judge Bull, she actually had an incentives and a sanctions component in her presentation. And so she had 2 sanction and incentive handouts herself. And so I'm going to also send those, actually Taylor, send those to you. So you'll have those 3 things. Questions, comments, it's a lot of information, I know. Yes, you can get the slides. The recording will be on our YouTube channel. So once it gets processed, really probably, unless I do it on vacation, it'll be when I'm back from vacation. I'll stick it out on the YouTube channel and we'll send an email blast that's out there. All of the sessions from the conference that we were approved to record are also out on our YouTube channel. There's some great material out there. Mac Jenkins, for example, I don't know if you guys got to see him, amazing presentation. Dr. Bridget Ortega, who did the compassionate jurisprudence, who I want to invite back for our December conference. She was incredible. And she's got some content around family involvement that we want to include. She is on the YouTube channel. There's a lot of, if they gave me permission to record them, they were recorded and they're on our YouTube channel, and this will be too. It is noon. I appreciate you all very much. If you didn't put your name in the chat, make sure you do that. It is the only way for us to determine that you were here is if we have some sort of record from the participant list. Unless you have any questions, you're free to go. I'll stick around for a few minutes if you have a question. Otherwise, have a great day. Thank you guys for coming. Joyce, I'm glad to see you're able to get on.
Thank you, Marie.
Hey, Brian, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing all right.